So obviously we've spoken to a lot of people in the industry about AI, and in particular companies who are starting to develop AI or integrate it into their products. And what do you think's been the main question people have been asking you?
100% patents versus trade secrets. So I've got my AI innovation, I've got the thing which I think is really clever. Should I patent it or should I protect it as trade secret? That's what the question which I'm always asked.
Okay, and why is that?
I think it's because it's not a straightforward question to answer, because there's the commercial dimension to it, what the company want out of their protection, what they want to do with their innovation. But then there's also the nuances which come from the technology itself. And one of the things which we've done is to think about the way in which you can kind of taxonomize or almost structure different innovations within the field of AI, particularly within machine learning. And at a very high level, it's useful to think about, well, does my innovation sit within the kind of the so-called application area? So am I using AI or machine learning to solve some problem which is unrelated to AI machine learning? So am I integrating a machine learning model within a product, for example, like the smart toaster, which we often talk about, uses AI to improve the quality of your toast, right? In that case, it's an application of AI. And so that's kind of one area where your innovation may sit. But obviously that model was generated in some way, and there may be innovations which led to its generation. And so you think about the way in which it was trained, the actual algorithm itself, which the model is based on, all of those things, there may be innovations within that area. And that can often go on behind closed doors, and those bits may not end up in the end product. And so when we're sitting down, we're talking to companies and they say, well, should I patent protect or should I seek to protect it by a trade secret? If it's in that product which is public facing, goes out on the market, it's straightforward, that's inappropriate really for trade secret protection. But then it becomes a lot more difficult, and you start thinking about kind of the commercial drivers and all of the other different dimensions there could be when that goes on behind closed doors. So if they're trying to seek patent protection or trying to protect by trade secrets, say a training algorithm, then you've got to step through considerations like, what's competitor activity like in this area? How detectable is it? How reverse engineerable is it? And those things then lead to giving them a kind of a better overview of perhaps whether patent protection or whether trade secret protection is more appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, Harry, because a lot of the conversations I've had as well have been around, one of the main questions I get asked is actually, in terms of the way you break it down as saying, you might have inventions which are kind of under the hood, and so they're not ones which are public facing. Is this question about detectability? Is it worth, if I'm spending a lot of money as a company, innovating in a particular space, providing these improvements to these algorithms, how easy is it for somebody to enforce a patent or a patent which has been granted? Because there's a question around how detectable is it? You just said there, I think it was a great point, which is essentially all these things, they're not public facing. So a lot of the times people ask me and say, well, how do I protect this? It's, is it going to be something which I can detect? And you say, well, actually, that's a real interesting question, because as it stands, detectability around inventions which sit in that space, really difficult. Actually, perhaps in some cases impossible. You can't really reverse engineer it, and a lot of the times you might not even be able to buy the model, or even if you were able to have access to the model, how could you say it's been trained in that particular way? Very difficult question. But one thing I found really interesting about this is that a few years ago we did a lot of research in this space. We ended up looking at, I think it was over 3,000 European patent applications, identified where they all sat in terms of this taxonomy which you were mentioning. What are they in the application side? Where does the innovation sit in these? And what we ended up finding was that actually around 50% of the applications were in this, I'd say, academic, the kind of the algorithm side of things, which was quite surprising for me, and I suspect for you as well, because what we were expecting was, you might think people would be innovating strongly. Well, they'll be innovating in both spaces, but we think that people might be protecting more in the application side of things, simply because it's easier to detect. You can say, well, actually, that's my product, that's my smart toaster, here it is, you can buy it off the shelf. And what was really interesting for me was that when we actually looked at it, the answer which we found is something slightly different to what we were expecting.
Yeah.
I was expecting to see a lot more of a much bigger focus of people protecting on the application side of things. And in fact, what we saw were people were protecting across all sides, including the algorithmic side of things, where the part which might be under the hood at that stage. And I found that really interesting because it kind of also gave a bit of insight into what's going on in the industry, I felt, because people are clearly seeing the value, their innovation in these points and saying, okay, well, we still are going to be able to use it perhaps for licensing purposes, being able to say to people, we've got innovations which we're protecting in this space, even if it might be slightly more difficult in terms of enforcement, there is still a lot of key value which exists on these patents. So that was a real eye-opener for me.